So, could you give us a brief introduction to your career and goals to the career?
Sure. So I am the Assistant Curator of American Art at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford University. And so, as a curator at a university art museum, I am responsible for the acquisition, preservation, collection, exhibition, and care for objects, specifically art objects, specifically American art objects, as that's in my title as the Assistant Curator of American Art. And so what that means is that I do research on the objects that are part of my aspect of the collection. I think about putting together exhibitions with these art objects. I write about them, I give tours, I do outreach, and I also acquire works of art for the Cantor's collection.
So, how's the work life and the experience in general? On a typical day, what would you do?
Well, granted, things are a little bit different right now during COVID. The museum's been closed since March of 2020, but in normal times, the work of an art curator is a 9 to 5, if not like a 9 to 9 job. And my days can vary wildly. Sometimes, if I have not so many meetings in my schedule, I can spend a good portion of the day doing research about individual art objects and planning for exhibitions. Usually when you see an art exhibition in a museum, it takes years to put together. It's not a quick process. It's something that takes a long time to do. But most of the time I have a lot of meetings with different parts of the museum team. So I interface with almost everybody in the art museum, between marketing, communications, or collections care, or matting and framing, or membership and development. The curator is the front-facing person in the museum. So we are kind of like the public experts within a museum space. We often talk to the press, for example, if there's an exhibition up or something I'm doing that's noteworthy. Sometimes I'll do an interview with the press. Sometimes I'll lead tours for donors. Sometimes I will be writing maybe for our magazine. It really just depends. Sometimes I'll be looking at an artwork in storage that's recently unframed and talking to a conservator about how to treat the work of art. So one thing that I really like is that the job involves so many different things in the day-to-day realm, and that can make it really exciting and fast-paced.
So, what drew you to this job and how did you get into it? And what would you think would make someone a good fit for this?
So I always liked art growing up. I was an artist when I was a kid, and art has always been such a huge part of my life. When I went to college, and it took me some time between high school and college to go to college, I took a little bit of a break. I realized in college that I was really more interested in what other people made for in terms of art than what I made. I was interested in the history of human beings making works of art. And so I wanted to pursue a career where I could have access to art all the time, because I always, no matter what, art was always one of the most important things in my life. And I wanted to make a career where I could be around that every day. Luckily, I went to a university called Willamette University. It's in Salem, Oregon. It's a small liberal arts college. But for the size of the college, it has a very incredible university art museum called the Hallie Ford Museum of Art. So I did some internships and assistantships at that museum, getting to learn about all the different aspects of museum work. And I also learned that if you wanted to be a curator, which I figured out pretty quickly that I wanted to be, because I liked the idea of putting exhibitions together, because I loved museums so much and I wanted to know who those people were who got to put the shows together. I learned that you needed, generally speaking, to go to graduate school to become an art curator, at least one at an academic institution like the Cantor, like at Stanford. You need to have a PhD. in art history or a related field in order to hold this job. So after college, I went to graduate school at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I did a PhD in modern and contemporary art history with a focus on American art. And while I was finishing my PhD, I did a fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And it was there that I was really reminded that museums are the space that I want to be in, because when you get a PhD in art history, you can really go a couple of tracks, a couple of major tracks. And the other track is to become a professor of art history. And as much as I love teaching, I really missed the creative aspect of being able to imagine what an exhibition looked like and think about space and creating and designing spaces that present knowledge. So I, when I was at the Met, I realized that this was really the place I wanted to go. And luckily, this job at the Cantor came up, and I applied while I was a Met Fellow, and I got the job. So I went straight from finishing my PhD to starting this job at the Cantor.
So can you think of any downsides to this career or any regrets that it has caused you?
Well, there are downsides to every career. I think something that's important to think about is, what are you willing to accept in your life as a downside, or what are the things that maybe would be a downside for someone else that maybe isn't for you? So I don't mind long hours because I often, when things are open and normal, I would leave the museum and have to go to an event in the evening. So there's a lot of time that is spent outside of the 9 to 5 job that is also spent socializing and talking to people. So if you're not somebody who likes to be very social, or you don't really want to interact with people all the time, then it's not impossible, but it will be a little bit more challenging for you to be an art curator. If you're not someone who likes to do public speaking or interviews or present all the time, then this might be a more challenging career for you. That doesn't mean you can't work in an art museum. There are plenty of jobs that you can have in an art museum, a lot of really behind the scenes work. So I have a wonderful team of people who help me put things together that work entirely behind the scenes and don't interact with the public. So it's just thinking about, to me, having to do public speaking all the time, while that might be a downside for some people, really isn't a downside for me. I enjoy it and I find it exciting work. The thing about graduate school and then pursuing a curatorial career in general, you will often have to travel. So it's hard. In order to be promoted, in order to accept jobs, you have to accept moving and picking up your life and moving from one place to another all of the time. It's generally not a position where you can start it and stay in one place for the rest of your life, unless you get very lucky and that's what you want. So you just have to think about if you're willing to move in order to get a job. And also, there aren't that many art museums in the world, or in the country. So the market for what we do is very competitive. So it's something to think about, that if, for example, you got married and you had a partner who got a job in a city that didn't really have an art museum or a place for you to go work, what would you do then? So that's one of the main downsides of museum work, is that it can be very difficult to get into. But once you're there, then you're there.
How do promotions work for this career?
So when it comes to being a curator, there's a pretty standard ladder that one can climb. You can enter it at different points. So for example, I was never a curatorial assistant, but that is something that is a job, a way to enter the ladder from the very bottom. If I would have left right out of undergrad, and started working at an art museum, that is generally the level that I could have entered in, because curatorial assistants, usually you only need a bachelor's degree. But because I didn't do that, although I did work in, I did have hold other positions in museums at different times, I left graduate school and I started at the assistant curator position. So that's the bottom level, and that is the level that I currently am at. And it is very similar to the way that professors climb their academic ladder. So after a few years, and after I put together a couple of successful exhibitions, I can be promoted to associate curator. And what that means is I get more responsibilities, and perhaps I am, working with another like assistant curator or a curatorial assistant. Generally speaking, someone at my level, an assistant curator, would assist the curator in charge, the full curator. And so I would be helping them with their projects. But at the Cantor, I am the only curator of American art. So I am responsible for the entire department and I don't assist anybody. So it's a sort of unusual in that way. But in any case, you move from assistant after a few years to associate. And then from there, you can be promoted after many years to full curator. And then you are in charge of the department. And generally you would work with, it depends on what kind of museum you're at, you would work with other curators in different departments, like the curator of European art or the curator of African art, and you would all be heads of your department. In some places after that, depending on the institution, you can be promoted to chief curator, which means you are the head of all of the curators in the museum, and that your creative vision is the leading vision for the museum. So that's generally speaking the track, and that takes many, many years to climb that ladder. And sometimes you never climb all the way to the top. So it really just depends.
So how would students get started in this career, and are there internships available?
There are lots of internships available in museums. One of the problems is that a lot of them, although this is changing, are unpaid internships. So in order for museums to be more equitable and inclusive, they need to pay all of their interns, which is something that we're all dealing with right now. I held internships when I was young. Some of them were paid, some of them were unpaid, and so that you can go learn on the job, but then you will not be compensated for it. So that is a problem. When you are in graduate school, there are also lots of fellowships and internships that you can apply for, like the Metropolitan Fellowship that I had, that will also give you different kinds of experience. You can also go a different route. You can try to work in a gallery. That is also one track that's also useful. You can still return to museum work after that. But there are many different departments in museums, so you can hold an internship in curatorial, but you could also hold one in education as well. So my suggestion would be, if you are interested in this type of work, for you to try and access and get experience with as many internships as possible, and hopefully they will be paid.
How has this career changed you as a person, and has it grown any new traits, expanded feelings you previously had?
I think that this career has made me a more open-minded, empathetic, and also flexible person. I have to use a lot of quick thinking, but also people skills. I have to interact with all different kinds of people. And I think that's really important. It's one of the best things that you can do in life, is to interact with as many different kinds of people as possible. I love interacting with artists, and so that's a main draw for this career. But in general, I think it's helped me understand how to work with others collaboratively, because when you're in graduate school and getting your PhD, so often you are just working by yourself and you're not really interacting with others. But now that I'm in this career, I have to work with so many different kinds of people, and that's wonderful, because I think when you have to do that, it makes you a better person. I also have to interact with galleries and estates and artists. And as a curator, people are trusting you with information, they're trusting you with their objects, they're trusting you to tell the stories correctly. And so you have a kind of responsibility to the community to be a thoughtful person who is engaging ethically and appropriately. So it's made me a a more thoughtful and open person, which are traits that I already wanted to grow in myself. So this has really helped. And it's also helped me kind of just work really quickly without trying to be overly too much of a perfectionist, which sometimes I could be in the past, because the reality is you do have to get things done. There needs to be art on the walls. There needs to be information out there. Sometimes things just have to happen and they won't be perfect, but that's okay. And you just have to go with that, because it's better to do something than to do nothing at all.
Do you have any additional comments?
Mm. I would say that I wish more people knew when they were younger that there are so many different kinds of jobs in the art world and in the museum world. When we think of museum jobs, people generally do think of just curators. But like I said, there are so many other careers in the arts in museums that are really rewarding and super interesting. And a lot of people end up coming to them later in life. But if you are interested in art, or maybe not even art, but you like museums, or you could think maybe a history museum or a science museum, this is a really interesting track. You get to interact with lots of people. You get to put together big, cool, amazing projects that other people will come see. So that's the really cool part about museum work, is that the things that you do, other people will come see them, right? So that's really fun. If you're a creative person, if you yourself are an artist and are thinking about, how do I make a career if I can't necessarily make a career as a full-time artist? We have lots of artists who work in the museum themselves, and they are very valuable. So it's a great track for artists to go. They're really valuable members of the community. And it's really just an interesting, dynamic field. And museums in general, we need more people of color. We need more women. We need more people from diverse backgrounds to come work in them, because for so long, people like myself have not, and it hasn't made museums the best that they can be. So I just want everyone to feel like that this is a career that they can access, and that it's for them if they want it to be. So.
Thank you very much.